Hello and welcome back to Poorly Explained Debate. Today I'm going to be going over how to form questions in Crossfires. And this goes for pretty much everybody currently competing within the debate. Crossfire is incredibly important, and it is the first opportunity you have. So, the first opportunity you have in a debate to challenge your opponent. So naturally, it goes without saying that this is incredibly important and that a good crossfire can go a long ways, simply because you challenge your opponent, and if you do it well, and your opponent can't really respond, it makes their case look substantially weaker as a result. So it's incredibly important to understand how Crossfire works and to understand what to look for in order to ask Crossfire questions. So over the past few videos I've made, I have given some decent looks into how a lot of Crossfire is made, especially with second speakers and how you create anti-arguments and how the rebuttals take place and whatnot. And so I'm not really going to go into that. Instead, I'm going to go over what you really need to look for when asking Crossfires. Okay? So first I'm going to go over a few ground rules about the Crossfire. And I believe I have mentioned this before. I'm not really sure though, but I'm still going to go over it regardless. Every single, everything you say in the Crossfire has to be in the form of a question. Okay, so form questions. Okay, now this sounds very simple, but a lot of new debaters, myself included when I was new, was not completely understanding what this rule actually meant. This means you simply cannot say statements. Okay. So, kind of how you will notice this is a lot of new debaters will be like, let's see, it'll be like, you said blank, okay? Or something will be like, blank isn't true. They'll give a statement, alright? And so you can still kind of ask questions within that general ballpark. However, when writing them out, make sure that it's appropriate to have a question mark at the end. So, for example, are you aware? Blank. Could you clarify? Blank. You know, that kind of thing. So you're always asking a question. So make sure you do not form any statements, because that will look very unprepared as well as very inexperienced on your end. And it'll also give your opponent the kind of show off a little bit of superiority at the same time. So I'm going to go over two of the big questions you will probably be asking. Okay, so you'll be asking, questions that directly relate to case. So I'm going to call these, let's call these challenging questions. Okay. Questions, because these are the questions that actually challenge your opponent's case and challenge your opponent's stance on the case, and kind of brings their flaws into light of the judge. Okay, so these are one type of questions. These are probably the strongest, however, most difficult to pull off. The other set of questions you can ask are the clarifying questions. And these are a little more nuanced. In terms of how to pull them off, but if you can figure out how to do this, it will work very well, because what will happen is when you ask your opponent to clarify something, they will more times than not end up contradicting themselves at some point in the debate, in which you can call that into attention. Okay, and you would do that once again through a crossfire, so, by challenging what they're saying. So clarifying questions kind of set up a challenging question, and it also makes your opponent look more unprepared if you can take a clarifying question and bring it into the later stages of a debate. So when asking challenging questions, we're gonna touch on that one first. Okay, so we're gonna kind of sideline clarifying for a little bit. So when looking at asking challenging questions, what you need to keep in mind is, what does this challenge? Okay, so what impact, what claim does this challenge? Does it break down a warrant? Does it completely negate an entire section of your opponent's case? Or does it just kind of go over irrelevant information that's very small and doesn't really matter in the big picture of the debate. It's really important not to get tunnel vision when pursuing debate, because what will happen, and this will happen quite a bit, is you will get an emotion of things. Okay, you will typically in a debate, people will focus on certain aspects. You have your case, you have your first constructive, and then your rebuttal kind of breaks down all that information into a digestible form. And from that digestible form, you start to see the actual debate come out. You start to see different claims taking taking prominence over others. You start to see one idea being drilled by both sides. And so what that can do is that can create a tunnel vision. And it's incredibly important as a debater to only get tunnel vision, if you are to get tunnel vision, to only get it on a matter that is important to the debate. Okay, so you don't want to be arguing about something that is very irrelevant or something that doesn't really matter, big picture, doesn't have a very large impact, because what's the point of debating when you could actually argue larger issues at hand? And so what Crossfire allows you to do, and what this kind of challenging question allows you to do, is it can help you break down that tunnel vision, take a step back, look at the entire debate itself, and hit on all the points that your opponents are not hitting. And so challenging questions can bring that into light. You have to ask yourself, though, what does this question challenge? What am I putting into concern? What am I putting into contention? Another point to how to find challenging questions, okay, is this important? Okay, I'm not going to explain this because I just did, but is this important? You don't want to waste time. You don't want to waste your own time or your judge's time just going over completely irrelevant and needless information and arguing something that doesn't really need to be argued. Because keep in mind, you only have a limited time to speak, and you don't want to waste that on any information that is in all regards irrelevant or unimportant to the big picture of a debate. Let's see. So, and then finally, let's go with the third tip to creating a challenging question, and that is, of course, having an answer, having a fallback, okay? So when you make a challenging question, you are challenging somebody's claim. That is important in one regard, okay, but it becomes even better if you have the ability in your rebuttal, in your summary speech, to directly combat that through your actual speech. So when you give a challenging question, okay, when you challenge a piece of information, when you challenge a claim, and you actually provide an answer, you provide a correct answer, you provide something that was overlooked, then what happens is not only are you challenging your opponent's case, but you're actually now undermining it and making them look weaker in the process. And so it's incredibly important to, before you ask a challenging question, to look at these three factors. Make sure that you, just don't discard a question because, it might be important and it might challenge, but it doesn't have an answer. Okay, but the best questions are going to have all three of these. Okay, now we're going to look at clarifying questions. This one's much simpler, but also it's a little more subtle. So when asking clarified questions, you want to ask for a stance. Okay, so clarify a stance. Okay, clarify a definition. Or clarify a process. All right, and these are the three big ones if you're looking at asking a clarifying question, because what'll happen is when you ask questions like these, people will get trapped in their own definition, in their own explanation. So for example, if you ask somebody to clarify their case's stance on something, and then let's say, in summary, their partner says something completely and utterly contradictory, well, guess what? You have that answer. You have that question. You can call it into attention and challenge it. So these clarifying questions essentially are meaningless within their own crossfire. Okay, they're just kind of there to shoot the breeze. But what you can do is you can turn it into something incredibly important in the later phases of the debate if your opponent doesn't play it correctly. And so, like I said several times, clarifying questions are a lot more subtle. They're a lot more nuanced because they're not going to work every time. But at the same time, if you can get them to work, they will work well. They will serve their purpose. Okay? And then clarifying a process too, because clarifying a definition is pretty self-explanatory, pretty intuitive. Clarifying a process is simply how something would occur. I feel like I have to. I feel like I have to define this. So if you want to clarify a process, it's like how would pro see this happen? How would insert negative effect happen in pro world? Okay, that's you're they're defining, they're clarifying a process for you, and so that's kind of how you can trap them with that one. I'd say clarifying a process. This one is probably, honestly, I would say that clarifying a process is probably the easiest to challenge later on in the debate, because then what can happen is that's how you have the most contradictions, because that's assuming that they take everything and put it into the real world, and then that's when you can start having those nuances. That's when you can start having the gray area, because nothing's picturesque. Nothing works well on paper. Everything works well on paper, fails in the real world. So, just look at communism. Alright, so now we are going to just end this one out, how to identify questions, okay? Okay, so how to identify questions. And this is going to be, and to kind of simplify this, this is going to be how you look at your case and you understand like what your opponent's saying and how you formulate questions. So I guess I'll just reword this. How to formulate questions. Okay, so naturally, all right, we're gonna have like the basics of challenging questions and clarifying questions. So you want to challenge something. Okay, so there is a point of contention that you have contradicting evidence for. Okay, so have evidence to challenge with. Okay, your opponent says something false / misleading. Keep in mind, people will deliberately withhold information in debate. Okay? People will deliberately withhold information to make their case look a lot brighter. Remember that nothing is wholly good and nothing is wholly bad. Everything has pros and cons, and it is up to you to identify that. Okay, so if your opponent is saying something that may be true, but it's not the full truth, call that into attention. Undermine what they just said. Make sure you illuminate the cons, because that will make your case, by extension, look much stronger. And if your opponent's just saying something blatantly wrong, call them out. I know I've referenced this, but in the past, but like with the debate on nuclear energy, people will say that nuclear reactors will be target to cyber attacks, which will discharge radiation on a massive scale. Well, that is simply not true because of how nuclear plants work, and you can call that into attention and undermine everything your opponent is saying and make them look significantly less credible in the eyes of the judge. Okay, and so those are pretty much the big two on how to formulate questions. It does also help when making a case to have pre-written questions. Okay, so when writing a case, you're going to find overlapping evidence. So if you're writing the pro and you're writing the con, you're going to see natural clashes occur. The kind of clashes that would appear typically in most every single debate. So it helps when writing your case that you kind of attack that and you approach that beforehand, as well as having a response to it, just in case if you're asked, just to make sure. And I can't really, I'm not going to show you that one document that I have with the pharmaceuticals that I've constantly been referencing, because I simply don't want to pull it up. But even on that, we have those questions. We have, pre-written challenges. We have pre-written clarifications in order to trap the opponent, in order to force them into our hand. And that's all that Crossfire is. It's incredibly important, and it's probably one of the most difficult rounds, or most difficult phases of the debate. However, it does have a formula, and if you can nail it, you will go much farther. That's all I really have to say. It's 14 minutes. That's fine. I'm okay with that one. I didn't waste too much time just ranting, I hope. And so that'll be it for Poorly Explained Debate.